the common postural shifts that happens is tucking of the pelvis, right? Walking around, standing with a tucked pelvis, really tight, restricted glutes. And what happens when we're standing and sitting like that all the time is our low back is really working way too hard. It's like hanging on for dear life because it doesn't have the support that it needs from inside of our body, from the front of our core, from the pelvic floor, right? So something I always want women to be aware of is pay attention to when you're sitting and standing, where is your pelvis? Do you notice you're tucked a lot? And do you feel your glutes like on all the time? It's super common. Most women don't even realize they're doing it until they bring awareness to it and they're like, oh, okay. So in order to untuck our pelvis, we have to start to let go of our glutes and start to allow our pelvis.
If you haven't done so already, go ahead and click that subscribe button down below. It's a little red button. You punch that and it's going to notify you every time we put out a new episode that can help you improve your bone health. And then also, if you haven't done so already, head over to BoneCoach.com. Sign up for the free 7-day osteoporosis kickstart. That's going to walk you through everything you need to be doing right now to get on the path to improvement and stronger bones. After you do those two things, go ahead and press play on this episode, and I'll see you inside. Welcome to this episode of the BoneCoach Show. Joining us today to explore moving better, mobility, fascia, core strength, and bone health is Erica Ziel. Erica Ziel is a mom of three. She received her health and human performance degree from Iowa State University. She is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, certified personal trainer and Pilates instructor, board certified holistic health coach, and is a deep core and postnatal exercise specialist. Her mission is to help women live a healthier, active life free of pain. She loves inspiring women to regain hope, but also experience true life-lasting results through movement and breath work. Erica is the founder and creator of Core Athletica, the Core Rehab Program, the Knocked Up Fitness brand, and postnatal instructor trainer course. She's also the host of the Core Connections podcast, and she believes that anything you want to improve about your health and life, you can. What an empowering message. Erica, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I'm so excited to see you again and get to have what I'm sure will be a very exciting conversation with you.
Yeah, this is going to be a great conversation. Let's start first with your story and how you got into helping all these women, really of all ages, in helping them move better and just live better lives.
So yeah, Kevin, so it goes way back. I always go back to when I was 5. I started having just crazy knee pain, and it was on a fairly regular basis, going to bed at night, curled up in a ball because my knees hurt so bad. And just time after time, this happened for years. And my mom would take me to the doctor and they kept saying, oh, it's just growing pains. She'll grow out of it. Well, I stopped growing at 14 and I was still having this pain at 17. So needless to say, it was not growing pains. So one day, my mom finally took me to the Mayo Clinic up in Rochester, Minnesota, and saw a specialist. And they say to me, they're like, well, you need to strength train your legs. They're too weak. And I wasn't an inactive child. I grew up on a farm. I was actually quite strong. I just had imbalances, right? So that to me was like this light bulb moment of like, you've got to be kidding me. I've been suffering with pain for the last 13 years of my life. And you're telling me I could have been strengthening to help to get out of pain. So that was what propelled me into exercise and lifting weights. And I got into the gym, in high school I was like the only girl in there doing Olympic lifting, learning how to lift correctly. Form mattered, right? So then I go off to college, study exercise science. I fortunately discovered Pilates as well while I was there. And, by the time I graduated college, I had basically rehabilitated myself, no longer had knee pain, and really started to experience at a really young age the power of movement to heal the body. I didn't find exercise science to lose the weight or to compete in some competition or things like that. I found it because it was what I needed so that I could live life without pain. And from that moment forward, I just continued to learn and evolve and learn so much about fascia and pelvic floor. And I love helping people to realign their bodies and get them out of pain. And so it's just really been one thing after the other. I've learned a lot from 3 pregnancies myself, but also working with a lot of pregnant moms. And I know that's not your audience, but the reason I say this is because I also work with a lot of women who, maybe their daughters, right, are having babies today, but so many times we don't connect and correlate and realize that our misalignment, our pain and dysfunction actually started from the childbearing years, all the changes that take place during pregnancy. And so I've just been very blessed to get to work with so many women during that time of their life and really help her to prevent aches and pains, to get out of pain and dysfunction, and at really any age. So that's where I started with everything.
And you do so much, you have such a big focus around our deep core and also our pelvic floor health. So could you just talk a little bit about those two things?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. And I always say that the pelvic floor found me. You guys, I studied, anatomy in college, and I didn't learn what the pelvic floor was. And that to me still shocks me today. I don't know if they learn it yet. I hear they learn it if they go off to be a physical therapist. But you don't learn in anatomy what the pelvic floor is at a university level, nor do you learn what fascia is. And so those are like the two things that I really feel like I kind of specialize in. And recognizing too that with our pelvic floor, so many times we think, oh, well, our pelvic floor, that's just about doing Kegels, right, Erica? And I'm like, no, no, no. Our pelvic floor is involved in everything we do. And Kevin, I'll tell you too, this also applies for men as well. So not just women, but so everything I talk about with deep core also applies to men too. So if we think of our core, right, many times we think of just our abdominals, right, the rectus abdominals, our obliques. But when we think of our deep core, I want you to go deeper into the body. And that's really everything from the base of our pelvis, which is our pelvic floor, through our abdominal cavity, which includes, yes, our abdominal muscles. It also includes the deeper muscles along the spine. It includes all the fascia around our organs. It includes our diaphragm, right, which is very important. Why breathing is super, super key for core function. It also includes our intercostals, all those muscles that go in between our rib cage, and I'll even say up into our middle back, because that plays such a role in our deep core function. So when I am teaching people, women in particular, how to move better, how to become stronger, we have to have the conversation around the pelvic floor, because we can't have optimal core function and optimal movement without understanding how the pelvic floor plays a role. And something that so many people have is, hip pain and back pain and things like that. And well, they are directly intertwined with our pelvic floor and vice versa, right? So that really is what our pelvic floor, or what our deep core is.
And what needs to be done to strengthen and properly use our core?
Yeah. So remember I mentioned the diaphragm. And so many times people think of doing Kegels as strengthening the pelvic floor. And I will just answer this question before we even get to it, Kevin, is that I am not a fan of women doing Kegels. And what I have seen time and time again, and for everyone listening, I have been working with women for 20 years now. So I've been doing this for a very long time. And I see time and time again that when women are doing Kegels, they are actually creating too much restriction in part of the pelvic floor. And it really then creates imbalance in the pelvic floor. Because I get a lot of women that come to me and they're like, Erica, can you help me because my pelvic floor is actually too tight? So many times we think the pelvic floor is too weak. And that is the case for some, but I see a lot more women with too tight of a pelvic floor, which then creates imbalance in the pelvic floor, really. So doing Kegels, I don't like. And so I just always tell women, put that word to the side. Let's actually address our core, our deep core, our pelvic floor with the musculature. So when I'm talking about strengthening your pelvic floor, let's actually talk about just strengthening your pelvic floor correctly and not use the word Kegels, because it messes with your brain. Because if you've been practicing Kegels for a bulk of your life, and when you go to do a Kegel, your brain is it's so automatic, right? It's just like walking. It has become such an automatic habit, whether we do it right or wrong, it just happens. So we need to kind of kick that out the door. And instead, we need to start thinking of, okay, what is our breath doing? Breath is key for optimal pelvic floor and deep core function. So I'll just cue everybody through this. So if you're listening right now, this is actually probably easier to practice if you're sitting, but you can practice it standing. And that is, make sure your legs are uncrossed. And if you just kind of go from back and forth in your pelvis and you find your tailbone and you find your pubic bone, right? And then you find your sits bones and your other sits bones. So you can find those 4 points. So our pelvic floor, for all of you, just visualize that it runs from your pubic bone all the way back to your tailbone, and then from your sits bones to your sits bones. So usually that shocks a lot of women when they realize, wait, the entire base of my pelvis is part of the pelvic floor musculature. Yes, so many women, in my experience, think the pelvic floor is like the size of a quarter. And that alone leads to dysfunctional pelvic floor activation. So now that you can all picture and visualize, okay, my pelvic floor is much bigger than I realized, and it's the base of your deep core function. Okay. So then what you want to practice is we want to think about releasing and relaxing in our pelvis, in our pelvic floor, and in our hips. We hold a lot of restriction and a lot of tension in our pelvis, and that also leads to restriction in the pelvic floor. It leads to twisting and imbalance and alignment in our pelvis, which can lead to SI joint pain, back pain, hip pain, all of these things. So we have to learn how to let go of the tension that we're holding in our pelvis. So if we just think about breathing in and breathing all the way down into our pelvis, and breathing out into our rib cage, breathing into our back. So many times we're taught like belly breathing, and that's okay, but that's not going to actually release the fascia deep into your pelvic floor if we're just doing belly breathing. Because a lot of times if we're belly breathing, we might be really tight and locked up in our low back, and we're not actually opening our diaphragm. So just start to visualize like we're breathing down towards our pelvis and breathing out into our rib cage and into our back. And you may not get that right away. That's okay, but just the awareness pieces of it, right? And then we want to think of those 4 points of our pelvic floor, lightly drawing them together and then zipping up and lengthening all the way through the top of our head. So just that little cue of like, okay, from my pelvic floor, I'm lightly lengthening upward. So you start to activate the abdominal wall, which is also includes the fascial layers of our abdominal wall. And we can start to visualize like we're supporting our organs in our body above our pelvic floor versus our pelvic floor having to hold everything in. So, Kevin, I know that was a lot. Do I need to break some of that down a little bit more?
I think that was a fantastic explanation, but you mentioned a word there that people may not be familiar with. And I've heard you say it twice, but I've also heard you speak in other places and say that fascia is like our body's superpower. So could you talk about maybe what is fascia and then what role does it play in helping us heal the body?
So I love fascia. So to give everybody kind of a brief overview of what fascia is, I like to explain it where it's really what connects everything in our body together. It is, it's our ligaments, it's what makes up our joints. It also encapsulates and wraps around all of our organs. It wraps around all of our muscles and wraps around every single muscle spindle, which makes up our muscles. It also wraps around nerves. And if you were to take off from the body an outer layer of fascia, it would be the entire outline of the body from the forehead to the toes and fingertips to fingertips. And it's really interesting the more you start to understand that fascia, that we can, couple things about fascia here. So number one is that we can improve the function of our fascia. So a lot of times, like a good example of this is scar tissue, for example. A lot of times we think with scar tissue, oh, like we have this scar tissue and there's nothing we can do about it. Now, we may not be able to actually break up the scar tissue. If we think of scar tissue as like all muddled fascia, it's all intertangled together, but we can soften that tissue so that we are less likely to have injury around the scar tissue, for example. And then we can actually make more fascia. Now, of course, as we age, our cellular rejuvenation tends to slow down, right? So as we age, our ability to improve our fascia may slow down a little bit, but with the right techniques, the right nutrition, the right movement techniques, there's a lot that you can do to actually enhance the fascia of your body, create more of it, and create better fluid motion of your fascia, because we want fascia to be strong, but not so strong that it's restricting you down. You can be strong and also be really fluid in your movement. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and then you also talk about creating space within your body and your joints. And could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so when we start to look at our movement and our body in a way of becoming more, I like to look at it and say actually more fascially strong, not just muscularly strong. I am all for us being muscularly strong, absolutely. But kind of think of it as two different ways. When we start to realize that fascia is what connects everything in our body together, and that we can create more fascia and we can create stronger fascia, and fascia will form the way that our body moves. So, for example, if we are sitting a lot during our days, right, and we're rounded forward, we're on our computer, on our phone, and we get that kyphosis in our spine, right? Well, the fascia is going to form and get tighter and stronger in that kyphotic state. So this is where posture is really, really, really important. Now, you may not be able to go from a severe kyphosis, rounded in the upper back, to good posture overnight. But in order to get to that better posture, we have to start changing our movement patterns today. So something we just start to pay more attention to is, okay, let's start to sit up taller. Remember that deep core conversation we had a little bit ago. So when we're sitting or standing tall, we don't want to just do it with our back muscles. We want to do it from inside of our body, right? That light, very light pelvic floor activation up through our body, just even that visual of lengthening through our body. So the more that we can start to incorporate that into our movements, into our day, we actually can start to create more space between our bones, which means a couple things. One, it's really good for our nerves, right? Because how many times when you get any pain, it's actually nerve pain because we're losing space between our joints. And a lot, how many women as they get older say, oh, well, I've shrunk a little bit, and oh, it's just from getting older. Okay, ladies, I hate to break it to you. That is actually an excuse. I'm just getting older. It's not actually like getting older isn't actually the reason for it. It's because we're losing that space between our joints. I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with that, 60s, 70s, and they've gone to their doctor after I've worked with them, for a period of time, of course. And the doctor's measuring them like 10 times. They're like, how did you grow? You're in your 60s, you're in your 70s. How did you actually get taller? And I'm like, you didn't get taller. We just got your height back because I taught her how to open up her torso, how to lengthen and be taller, which trains her fascia and new fascia to be stronger in a taller, lengthened position and hold more space for her bones, for her nerves. And guess what? You can breathe better, you can move better. And when we start moving better, it makes it easier for us to do the things in life that we want to do, to lift the weights that we maybe need to be doing for our body, running around after kids, grandkids, hiking, like whatever it is. The mobility piece is super, super important. And in order to increase that mobility, we have to find space. And so I was really talking about space in the spine. That's key. And another area is with the pelvis, which ties us back into the pelvic floor conversation. I mean, I know a lot of women listening, have had back pain, SI joint pain, hip pain, pelvic floor stuff going on. We have to start looking at, how can we actually create more space in our hips, in our pelvis, and be more balanced? Because our pelvis is just bones held together by fascia. And when we start understanding, actually, that's our whole body, really. When we start looking at our body as, we're just a bunch of bones held together with fascia, and we can change our fascia, we can manipulate our fascia, we can improve the way it functions, then honestly, it opens up this whole new potential for your world of not only health, but mobility and the things like getting you back to doing the things in life that you love. And that's always my goal when I am having these conversations.
And maybe, for our audience that has osteopenia, osteoporosis, are there things that they maybe shouldn't be doing as they're, starting to build out a plan or considering implementing some of the things that you're talking about?
Yeah, so a lot of what I teach tends to be really gentle and fluid, But there definitely are some things when it comes to movement that we want to avoid with osteoporosis. And some of that is forward flexing motions, right? And especially when I was talking about already being kyphotic, and I find too women, I feel, Kevin, you're shaking your head. Yes, I feel like a lot of women who have osteopenia or osteoporosis tend to be in that little bit more of a kyphotic state. So we want to be avoiding things that are continuing to encourage that and that rounded forward, and doing a lot of really, really aggressive spinal flexion movements. So if you do yoga or Pilates, which I love both of those, but avoiding the really excessive forward flexing movements and things like that we want to avoid. We want to really work to create more stability through our spine. So everything that I've talked about, right, creating more strength, space and strength. So instead, like doing more gentle extension exercises would be much better. But again, a small range of motion is really where you want to start with all of that. And then a couple other things is anything that's high intensity or causing you to change direction really fast. That's really jarring for your body. I would not be doing those type of movements with osteopenia or osteoporosis. Maybe you can get there again one day as you heal your body and your bones get stronger. And that's one thing you have to think about. And I'm always telling women this when we're dealing with pain or you're dealing with osteoporosis, you've got something going on with your body and you're like, man, I really want to do fill in the blank one day. So I want you to keep that in your visions. I always tell women, I'm like, if you want to get back to doing something that you can't do right now, don't just give up and say, oh, well, that was a past life for me. I'm of the firm belief that maybe you can or cannot fully get there, but it depends on what it is, right? Maybe it's you want to just be able to go for long hikes up in the mountains. Maybe you can't do that well today, but that is definitely something that women can do well up into their 80s and 90s. I'm a firm believer, like, do it forever, right? But sometimes we have to pull it back and make sure we're staying within the right movements for us right now, so that we're doing the right things that then will build up in time. And some other things is really deep twists, right? So really what it comes down to, if you want to think of it this way, from a movement perspective with osteopenia and osteoporosis, we want to really do exercises that are creating length and stability for our spine, especially, right? So we don't want to be doing any deep twisting. I'm not a fan of deep twisting for a lot of people, especially, so we think about this, like if your pelvis is not moving and we're twisting at the rib cage, I'm not a fan of that for people, regardless of whether you have osteopenia or osteoporosis. It puts a lot of stress on your SI joint. So any sort of rotation you're going to be doing needs to be lengthened through your body, right? Everything I've already talked about. And then we want gentle rotation from our pelvis and our ribs. But because guess what we're doing with that? We're creating stability for our spine versus twisting at the spine. We want to avoid any of those deep twists for about anybody, but especially with osteopenia and osteoporosis. So Kevin, those are some of the big top ones. Do you have anything you want to add or want me to talk more about?
I love that you were talking about that people should maybe, where they are right now, they may need to tone certain things back or make adjustments or modifications, but to keep in their vision that they could possibly get back to being somewhere in the near future. So I see a lot of people that almost just accept, like, oh, you know what, this is the diagnosis, there's nothing I can do. But in reality, there is so much that you can do. There are so many things you could do, and you can start where you are with what you have, today, tomorrow. Today is
absolutely
day one, pretty much.
Yeah, I've seen it time and time again, and with women a lot younger, even. It's amazing how many times women, and they've been told by the medical industry, they've seen this person or that person, they're like, oh, well, you have to have surgery, or you're going to be on this pill, or you can't do this ever again, right? And they're like, but really, that's it? And I always tell everybody, challenge that. Challenge that. Keep searching and keep trying, because medicine, while there's definitely great things about the medical world, when it comes to mobility and fascia and all the things we're talking about today, and Kevin, I know a lot about what you talk about, it's not their expertise, right? So I help people improve their mobility so that we can, do the things in life we love, but it doesn't always mean we're going to get there overnight. But it's amazing the women that I've been able to help that were just told like, oh, well, you're just going to have to deal with it. And they're like, no. And that's where it starts. I guess is my point, is like just you not accepting it and realizing like, I'm going to change my nutrition, do what I need to do. I'm going to practice my movements wherever that is today that's appropriate for me. And it's baby steps, and it's creating those little habits that in time can really lead to amazing results. And heck, maybe you can be stronger than when you were younger, especially maybe you weren't someone who was super active, but as you've gotten older, you really recognize like, I love being outside, or I want to be able to keep up with kids, grandkids, like whatever it is in life. And I think when we find those things that really light us up and we remind ourselves, no, I'm doing this for me so that I can do these things that I love and not accept whatever maybe you've been told from other professionals. That's my stance on that.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Now, sometimes when people they may prevent themselves from doing certain things because they've got pain in certain areas of their body. It may prevent them from moving in a certain way that's safe, or prevent them from doing specific exercises. And I know one of the big types of pain that people have is back pain. Could you talk about what are the real causes of back pain? We know for osteoporosis, sometimes that could be potentially a fracture, but what are the other contributors to that?
Yeah, so many times with back pain, like we might feel the pain in the back, and like you said, there's always outliers with osteoporosis, right? There could be definitely something going on with your back, but if there is not, and even if there is, here's where this still can apply to you, is that we have an imbalance in our musculature, in our fascial system somewhere, and many times it comes down to what's going on with our pelvis, what's going on with our pelvic floor and our deep core function. Because so many times, and again, I can lead this back to especially, moms, right? No matter how long it's been, I work with moms who are like, wait, my baby's 30 years old, but if we can go back and recognize that postural shifts that take place, hips spreading, ribs spreading, organs moving, all the things that the body goes through. And as it comes back, we tend to sometimes hang on to those tendencies because our body will always learn to cheat. And so a common postural thing that happens, and again, honestly, you don't have to even be a mom for this to happen, but one of the common postural shifts that happens is tucking of the pelvis, right? Walking around, standing with a tucked pelvis, really tight, restricted glutes. And what happens when we're standing and sitting like that all the time is our low back is really working way too hard. It's like hanging on for dear life because it doesn't have the support that it needs from inside of our body, from the front of our core, from the pelvic floor, right? So something I always want women to be aware of is pay attention to when you're sitting and standing, where is your pelvis? Do you notice you're tucked a lot, and do you feel your glutes like on all the time? It's super common. Most women don't even realize they're doing it until they bring awareness to it and they're like, oh, okay. So in order to untuck our pelvis, we have to start to let go of our glutes and start to allow our pelvis to find more of a neutral to even a slight anterior tilt. For women, we should have a little bit of a curve in our spine, right? So that part of our spine gives us a little buffer as we're moving during our day. But if it's rounded all the time, it's taking on so much stress and pressure. And so even if there is, even a fracture there or a herniated disc or something like that, like sometimes we got to deal with that first and heal it, but then we have to go back to like, well, why did that get caused in the first place, right? What was there postural things going on that I can work to improve upon? Now, someone also could have too much of an arch in their low back and it's really pulling forward. And then we may have to kind of correct a little bit. That can also come from not having the right balance of core strength in their body. So a lot of times with low back pain, I find time and time again, we have to get the stress out of the back and we have to improve our breathing to then also help us with that pelvic floor, deep core activation and work on our posture, right? Just posture alone, making little changes. And this is what I love about movement. And I'm always preaching to all my students, my ladies, is that, hey, I love you getting your workouts in, as many days of the week as you can, but take the pieces you're learning about your movement and put it into your day. We are moving all day long. And I think sometimes we forget that. And we tend to think of, oh, our exercise is over here and then we're done. We put it away, we move on for our day. But if you stop to think about it, we're sitting. Sitting is movement. We're breathing. We have a pelvic floor still, right? How are we holding our body? We carry groceries, right? We're doing all these different things during our day. And I just want to kind of open up everyone's eyes to be like, how are you moving your body? Are you using your back and tucking your butt a lot when you go to lift something up? Or, how is your posture? How are you breathing? Are you actually lightly activating your pelvic floor, your deep core to help you lift something, to help you move something during your day? Or are you just letting your back do all the work? And again, we're not going to be able to do a 180 overnight. And I also want to say 2 postural shifts for everyone listening. Don't try to overcorrect. Okay. If you've had a tucked pelvis for a really long time, you're not going to be able to untuck your pelvis just like that overnight. I do not recommend it, because here's what happens. Remember, we talked about fascia and how fascia forms the way our body moves. So that fascia with a tucked pelvis is pretty restricted and pretty tight in that tucked pelvic position. Now, we can absolutely change that, but fascia takes time to change. So that's another piece I just want everyone to recognize is we don't want to make too big of corrections or something else can grab and compensate. And that's really what, when it comes to posture, that's where aches and pains come from, is because our body is cheating. It's trying to keep us upright, but it will always cheat if the right muscles are not on. And many times it cheats with our low back, because our low back, our pelvis, is missing support from our deep core.
And I know sometimes when people are experiencing pain, the tool that they may try to use to correct that pain is stretching. So could you talk a little bit about stretching and why that could actually be keeping someone in pain?
Yeah. Oh, I love this conversation. Kevin, how much time do we have? So when it comes to stretching, and I hear this a lot, right? You're like, okay, my back hurts. Just use the back example. That's a common one. So you might be doing some traditional just stretches, rounding your back, right? And you're like, oh, that feels so good when I do it. You get a temporary relief from it, right? But then it just comes right back. Your pain doesn't actually go away. You get a temporary release, but nothing is fixed. So I actually find that traditional stretching, just really opening the tissue and giving it a deep stretch, actually can lead to keeping you in back pain even longer, because what your back is actually looking for is strength and stability from another area. Okay, so again, it kind of goes back to this: where you feel the pain is likely not actually what's causing the pain. Now, again, I know people will say, well, what about a herniated disc, things like that? I get that. And your back has responded to not having the stability. It's really the stability that we need to have more of. So if we're looking at, okay, we've got the pain in our back and we're doing just a deep stretch, we get a little relief and we're doing it every day, but pain's not getting better. So what we need to think about doing instead, go back to our initial conversation about deep core function. Now, we want to think about movement with a light connection, because here's the thing: fascia likes to be lightly stimulated in order to become stronger. So we're not actually strengthening our fascia if we're doing a deep stretch. We're actually letting it go, and then we have even less support and less stability. So instead, what you want to think about, and I'll use an example of, let's do a cat-cow, for example. I feel a lot of people know what like a cat-cow movement is, where on your hands and knees, and you just kind of, are moving your back in and out a little bit, arching and rounding. And so if we just go through that and we're really stretching our back, but we're not paying any attention to our pelvic floor, our core connection, having any activation of the muscles and fascia along our spine, then that's not really leading to a stronger spine and more stability and balance through our body. So instead, you can do the exact same movement. We bring our breath into play and we think about our breath lightly activating pelvic floor and all of our deep core muscles, and we think, okay, how can I actually activate my core, elongate my spine, and move through an arch and around very slow, really gently. And we're moving with our breath and we're lengthening the tissue because fascia, remember, likes to be active. And when we are active, it's actually called tensegrity if we want to use a big science word. And so an example, actually, let's do this, Kevin. If everyone listening, if you just put your arms out for a second, I'll just give everyone a better
And some people
visual.
may be watching on YouTube also, but you could talk through
okay.
it as if they're just listening on the podcast.
Okay, perfect. So if you put your arms out and we just hold our arms out, feel how that feels with your body. Kind of feel like, okay, shoulders are going to get tired after a bit. Some of you might be starting to feel it in your neck, right? Now I want you to think about lightly zipping up, pelvic floor, lower belly, lift through the sternum, lift through the top of your head. And now reach through your fingertips and open your chest. Like really reach through your fingertips, okay? And then just let everything go and just kind of hang there. And then lift up, lengthen, and reach. How much more connection, as I call it, right? It's fascial activation. Do you feel when you lengthen up through your body and when you reach through your fingertips? You might almost feel some like burning in your forearms or, because you're a little tight, like you're really reaching out through those fingertips. Like how long can you make your fingers? Kevin, can you feel the difference in that?
Oh, I feel the difference. I feel it.
Yeah. So that's really a good example of fascial tensegrity, essentially. So we could just go through the motions and go into deep stretches, but we're not active. We're actually going to create so much more strength and space when we work through, it could be the same movements we've done before, but we do it in a way that's activating that tissue. And then in time, you're going to create more strength and you're actually then telling, oh, pelvic floor, deep core, I need to be on. My mid back needs to be on, right? Whatever movement we're doing. So it's really all about connecting and lengthening through every movement we do. I teach that with everything. And it is amazing how it transforms and changes someone's body because now the body's learning how to actually be strong through movement and in quote stretches.
And the other thing that I've heard you talk about, and by the way, every time somebody mentions the words posture or breath, I can't be the only person that either, sits up a little straighter or, takes a breath in when I hear that. So I know I'm not the only person that does that. But you have talked about breath a few different times here. Mm-hmm. What role does that play in our whole overall health picture and even in this pain picture too?
It is almost the number one thing, right? So we can't properly activate our deep core without improving our breath, without using our breath to do the work. We also know breath is really good for our nervous system. And this is where we can do all the movement in the world. We can try to force our body to do the things and we may not get the results because we're not really tuning in and listening to our body. And this is why when I teach a lot, it's all about moving with your breath. And in the beginning, I know it's really hard and really confusing for a lot of people. And a lot of people will be like, Erica, I'm backwards on my breath from what you're telling me. That's okay. And so we also have to give ourselves grace with our breath and recognize that with practice, it does get better. So we have to always start with where we are. But breath is huge. And it is something that we just have to keep practicing. And so to start with, remember I talked about deep core and I was saying, okay, when you breathe, think about your breath going down all the way to your pelvis and out into your ribs and into your back. And again, some of you are like, or a lot of you may be like, Eric, I have no idea how to do that. That's okay. Again, you just have to start with where you are and start to bring awareness to it. And so I just want to clarify this because when I tell people, okay, breathe down into your pelvis, you're like, but your lungs don't go all the way to your pelvis. I'm like, I know that. But what happens is if we learn how to breathe and activate our diaphragm. So when we inhale, our diaphragm goes down and our ribs can widen and we can breathe into our back. It causes a relaxation response in our pelvis and our pelvic floor, where so many of us are so restricted and so tight. And is it possible to be really tight and really restricted in our pelvis and actually have a weak pelvic floor? Sure, anything is possible. It's imbalance. The body likes to cheat. But when we start to recognize that that breath is really what's working the inside of our body, because let's say, maybe you have some major restriction inside of a rib cage from an accident or an injury, or just, a biomechanic of movement for the way you've moved for a lot of time, right? Or the way you carried a child 20 years ago, right? It doesn't really matter. And we can do all the manual work on the outside and help it a little bit. But when we learn to breathe inside, we can get such massive release of tissue, AKA fascia, that can just unlock so much with our body. And so it's this whole thing we talk about deep core function. Yes, the pelvic floor matters, but again, we have to stop looking at the body in pieces. We have to look at how it all plays its role together. So when I start with someone, I always start with the pelvis and the pelvic floor, because we got to start getting that movement, that moving, and getting her understanding what's going on. And then it's okay, let's layer in some deeper breath. What's going on with the rib cage? I see a lot of women really locked down in their rib cage. So something like a good example here, and if anyone's watching the video, when I see people breathe a lot, they're breathing and their shoulders rise, right? And they're like, the shoulders go to the ears, and we're really tight and locked up in the upper chest, like across the sternum. So, and again, that kyphosis, that rounded forward, exacerbates that breathing pattern. So if that's you right now, okay, just recognize it and be like, okay, there's definitely room for me to improve my breathing pattern. So we have to finesse it. We can't just overnight go from a rounded spine to be like, oh, I'm going to be really tall and open up my ribs. That's not possible. But I want you to see where you want to go. So we have to just start bringing awareness to, okay, if I'm noticing myself being rounded a lot, okay, let me just start to, okay, how tall can I get without causing pain? Or you have a little discomfort because now you're waking up tissue, fascia, muscles, right, that you haven't really worked as much before. And now what can I do with my breathing, right? So something that a lot of people don't realize with breath is that so many times when we breathe in and the rib cage drops down. And so if we have that kyphosis, it exacerbates that. But I've even seen people with really good posture, and when they breathe, they exhale and their rib cage goes down, and like everything tightens and draws down. And then guess what? We get this extreme tightness in our neck. Right? How many people have neck pain? That's, again, a whole other conversation, but it all ties in because our breathing is actually pulling us down. We're so restricted. So we have to actually start thinking about being open across our sternum and in the intercostals up above our chest, the upper part of our chest. So as we're breathing in, we're actually breathing down, waking up our diaphragm. And then again, it's that breathing out into the rib cage, the sides of the rib cage, breathing into our back, that can then work to open all that up. So then as we exhale, our ribs, we can actually feel a softening across our sternum and our upper rib cage. And that doesn't happen overnight, but it's a place to strive for. And so the cue that my clients love is they like, just visualize a string on your sternum, just lightly pulling you up, right? So right now when you do it, you might notice your ribs collapse. And that's going to be harder for you to get that proper pelvic floor deep core connection, but you're moving in the right direction so that we can start to improve our breathing patterns. And then as we open up more, our pelvic floor connection and deep core connection and our posture and our back pain, everything, it's like a domino effect, right? Everything's all connected. But something that I really like, Kevin, to teach people how to improve their breathing in their back is laying on their stomach. So for everyone listening, hopefully all of you are able or really striving at some point to do some sort of back extension, even if you're barely moving. Sometimes just even lightly activating your back line. But when you're laying on your stomach, is practice breathing in through your nose and breathing all the way down towards your sacrum, right into your low back. And that's sometimes a lot easier position to start to learn how to improve your breathing, so that you then, when you're standing or you're moving, you can then start to feel like, oh, I can breathe into my back a little bit. And just that alone, honestly, can release some tension and restriction of the fascia in your low back. So that's a good trick. If none of you have tried that before, I highly recommend do it when you get into bed, even, just lay on your stomach if you can. Obviously, with any movement, I always tell people, please stay out of pain. If it doesn't work for you today, that's okay, but it might be something you want to work towards in the future. But just that laying on your belly and breathing into your back can unlock a lot of restriction in your body.
So interesting, so helpful. If you're listening to this right now and you found this helpful, be sure to, and you're on YouTube, hit that like button. If you're on the podcast, always helpful to leave a positive rating and review if you feel like it's helpful and positive, of course. And then be sure to hit subscribe on YouTube and the podcast, and then share this with someone especially if you found this helpful and you think a friend would find this helpful, be sure to share it with them. But also, Erica is going to talk a little bit about the work she does with also younger audience too, who may be, in their 20s or 30s or 40s also. So you could also share this with a daughter or a daughter-in-law or someone like that. So Erica, could you tell us a little bit about, number one, where can people find you and your work? And then talk a little bit more about your different programs and the different people that you help.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. So you can go to my website. It's ericaziel.com. My last name is spelled Ziel. And so I work with women of all ages. And so my main program that I teach is called my Core Rehab program, which is exactly what it is. It's all about teaching you how to realign your body, strengthen your core, a lot of what we talked about today, and then some. And it really takes you, phase by phase, and we build upon it. And then I also offer coaching calls in there because I like to have connection with everybody. And it also allows me to personalize for you. So I always say, please, take advantage of those calls because they are super valuable. But I also do have my Knocked Up Fitness brand. Yes, easy to remember, I know. And it really is it's a lot of what we talked about today, but for pregnancy and movement to help her to feel better during pregnancy, because I am a firm believer that all those aches and pains and the dysfunction that we talk about as like, oh, that's normal, honey, you're pregnant, or you just had a baby, or whatever it is. And, some aspects of it maybe, but I find time and time again that it's just because we're not taught the right breath, the right movement, and all of that. So I do all of that for the expecting mom, postpartum, and beyond. And it's amazing. We have so many women of all ages, and it's just amazing how sometimes the littlest bits of education can have such a massive transformation on not just your movement and mobility, but on your overall health.
And then you also have some information on diastasis recti and a few other things too.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yeah. So diastasis recti, which is a common conversation with moms, pregnancy, postpartum, and it really just tacks on to the conversation we have today. Again, kind of remember I said, like, we like to compartmentalize things. And so diastasis, if someone comes to me and they have diastasis recti, which is that separation of the abdominals, I start her at the same place I do with everyone else. We've got to learn about the deep core and how to move and how to breathe. And we can do so much healing there as well. So it's incredible.
Well, I'm excited for everyone to be able to go visit where you're at, and all the links and everything that we mentioned today. We're going to put those in the show notes. You can find all the resources, show notes, everything over at bonecoach.com/Erica Ziel, Core Rehab. And everybody else, for you listening, thanks so much. We'll see you in the next episode. Hey, it's Bone Coach Kevin Ellis. Hope you found that episode helpful and that you enjoyed it. Just one last reminder, if you haven't done so already, head over to bonecoach.com, sign up for your free 7-day osteoporosis kickstart. It's going to tell you everything you need to do to start getting on the path to improvement. Hope you found this helpful. I'm your Bone Coach Kevin Ellis. I'll see you soon.